On a chilly November morning in 1961, a commuter train rolled into St. Louis Union Station, just like any other day. But moments later, a sudden explosion ripped through the baggage car, injuring dozens and halting operations across the Midwest. Authorities blamed a faulty propane heater. Case closed. But 30 years later, declassified CIA documents reveal something far more sinister. The train was carrying sensitive evidence linked to money laundering through a powerful governor's political campaign. What happened on that platform wasn't an accident, it was a message. And someone made sure the truth stayed buried for decades. Stay with us, because the deeper you dig into this case, the more dangerous it gets.
November 17, 1961, began like any other cold Midwestern day. The 7:45 a.m. commuter train was en route from Springfield to St. Louis, carrying its usual mix of office workers, students, and a handful of federal couriers. Passengers described the ride as calm and uneventful, until the train pulled into Union Station. At exactly 9:02 a.m., as porters began unloading bags, an explosion erupted in the baggage car. Shattered glass, flying debris, and a wave of panic turned the Grand Terminal into a war zone. Emergency services were on site within minutes. 32 people were injured, 6 critically. Miraculously, no one died. Initial reports blamed a faulty propane heater stored near parcels and trunks. Investigations were brief and inconclusive. Within 2 weeks, the press moved on. But some things didn't add up. Despite the injuries and the high-profile location, there was surprisingly little federal involvement in the aftermath. The FBI issued a short statement. Local police conducted interviews, yet no one followed up on why several federal couriers had been assigned to that train, or why some of their bags had mysteriously disappeared after the explosion. Union Station staff were told not to speak to reporters. Security camera footage, limited at the time, vanished. One baggage handler later claimed in a private letter to his sister that 2 men in suits had entered the car minutes before the blast and were never seen again. Fast forward to 1993. An investigative journalist named Louise Grady, working on a book about unsolved political scandals of the 1960s, uncovered a redacted CIA memo buried in an unrelated file. The memo mentioned a containment operation at STL Rail Terminal, executed per Domestic Security Protocol, dated November 1961. Grady filed multiple FOIA requests. After years of stonewalling, she received access to heavily redacted files referencing a political figure from Missouri coded as Gov. 9. Cross-referencing timelines and campaign finance records, Grady made a chilling discovery. The governor in office at the time, Edgar Meacham, was under secret investigation for laundering campaign funds through front companies tied to railroad logistics. And one of the bags destroyed in the blast, it was supposed to carry ledger books that tied Meacham to offshore accounts. In 1995, Grady tracked down Daniel F. Lefferts, a retired postal inspector who had been assigned to train security in the early 60s. After repeated calls, he agreed to meet her. But Lefferts never showed up. His body was found 2 days later in a wooded area outside Rolla, Missouri. Ruled a suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, the case was quietly closed. Grady received anonymous threats for months after, warning her to drop the story. Still, she kept digging. Several key pieces of evidence from the explosion, such as fragments of the baggage car, burned luggage, and even medical reports, were lost in transit between St. Louis and Washington. Union Station's internal incident logs from that day were also removed from archives sometime in the late 1980s. One passenger, Thomas Raymore, who suffered facial injuries from the blast, later testified that he'd overheard 2 men arguing over a locked crate during the ride. His testimony was recorded by a local reporter but was never published. Raymore died in a suspicious house fire 6 months later. Governor Meacham, once considered a rising star in national politics, suddenly resigned in January 1962, just weeks after the explosion. At the time, he cited family illness as the reason. But new records uncovered by Grady show that days before stepping down, Meacham received a classified briefing from federal agents. Whatever was said in that room ended his career. He spent the rest of his life in obscurity and refused all interviews. The most chilling detail emerged from a single page in the CIA's Domestic Operations Division archives. It referenced Project Gray Fog, a covert domestic interference campaign targeting internal destabilization threats via transportation infrastructure. While most of the file remains redacted, one sentence stands out. Target material compromised, operation successful, secondary collateral within acceptable limits. Was the train bombing part of a Black Ops cleanup mission? And how many more incidents like this were buried in plain sight? In 2001, Grady received an unmarked package with microfilm reels. On them were copies of ledger pages listing Meacham's campaign contributions, some of which matched financial transfers through railway subsidiaries. But just as she prepared to go public, Grady disappeared. Her apartment was found undisturbed. Her manuscript, notes, and hard drives were gone. To this day, her fate remains unknown. The Union Station bombing never received a formal reopening of the investigation. Most Americans have never heard of it. It remains a footnote in transportation history, written off as a freak accident. But for those who've dared to look closer, the signs of conspiracy are impossible to ignore. Vanishing evidence, silenced witnesses, political fallout, and covert intelligence signatures. It wasn't just a bomb. It was a message. What started as a routine morning commute ended as a carefully orchestrated cover-up. The truth was loaded into a baggage car and destroyed before it could ever see daylight. And somewhere, deep in sealed government vaults, the full story waits. Stay tuned, because the further we ride into America's forgotten railways, the more explosive the secrets become.